Good afternoon, gentle listeners. It's Erin, your librarian storyteller for the day. Welcome back to Legend and Lore, where every week I'll be telling you a collection of myths, folktales, and fairy tales that come from different cultures from all around the world, from Japan to South Africa, from Greece to Polynesia. This week I'll be regaling you with some Japanese mythology. Now make sure you stick around because at some point in the video I'll be giving you a keyword to enter into your summer reading account. Participate and earn enough keywords and you might just win a fabulous prize. Now let us delve down into the world of Japanese mythology. I thought it would be smart to begin with the beginning. The birth time of the gods, where the earth was made, the land was plentiful, and a new love was began and ended. Before time was, and yet while the world was uncreated, chaos reigned. The earth and the waters, the light and the darkness, the sun, the stars, and the firmament were intermingled in a vapory liquid. All things were formless and confused. No creature existed. Phantom shapes moved as clouds on the ruffled surface of the sea. It was the birth time of the gods. The first deities sprang from an immense bulrush bud, which rose spear-like into the midst of the boundless disorder. Other gods were born, but 3 generations passed before the actual separation of the atmosphere from the more solid earth. Finally, where the tip of the bulrush points upward, the heavenly spirits appeared. From this time, their kingdom was divided from the lower world, where chaos still prevailed. To the 4th pair of gods it was given to create the earth. These 2 beings were the all-powerful god of the air, Izanagi, and the fair goddess of the clouds, Izanami. From them sprang all life. Now Izanagi and Izanami wandered on the floating bridge of heaven. This bridge spanned the gulf between heaven and the unformed world. It was upheld in the air, and it stood secure. The god of the air spoke to the goddess of the clouds. There must needs be a kingdom beneath us. Let us visit it. When he had said so, he plunged his jeweled spear into the seething mass below. The drops that fell from the point of the spear congealed and became the island of Onogoro. Thereupon the earth-makers descended and called up a high mountain peak, on whose summit could rest one end of the heavenly bridge, and around which the whole world should revolve. The wisdom of the heavenly spirit had decreed that Izanagi should be a man and Izanami a woman, and these 2 deities decided to wed and dwell together on the earth. But, as befitted their august birth, the wooing must be solemn. Izanagi skirted the base of the mountain to the right, Izanami turned to the left. When the goddess of the clouds saw the god of the air approaching from afar off, she cried, enraptured, "Ah, what a fair and lovely youth!" Then Izanagi exclaimed, "Ah, what a fair and lovely maiden!" As they met, they clasped hands, and the marriage was accomplished. But for some reason, the union did not prove as happy as the god and goddess had hoped. They continued their work of creation, but Awaji, the island that rose from the deep, was little more than a barren waste, and their firstborn son, Hiruko, was a weakling. The earth-makers placed him in a little boat woven of reeds and left him to the mercy of wind and tide. In deep grief, Izanagi and Izanami recrossed the floating bridge and came to the place where the heavenly spirits hold eternal audience. From them they learned that Izanagi should have been the first to speak when the gods met round the base of the pillar of earth. They must woo and be wed anew. On their return to earth, Izanagi, as before, went to the right, and Izanami to the left of the mountain. But now when they met, Izanagi exclaimed, "Ah, what a fair and lovely maiden!" And Izanami joyfully responded, "Ah, what a fair and lovely youth!" They clasped hands once more, and their happiness began. They created the 8 large islands of the kingdom of Japan. First the luxuriant island of the dragonfly, the great Yamato, then Tsukushi, the white sun youth, Ayo, the lovely princess, and many more. The rocky islets of the archipelago were formed by the foam of the rolling breakers as they dashed on the coastlines of the island already created. Thus China and the remaining lands and continents of the world came into existence. Now were born to Izanagi and Izanami, the ruler of the rivers, the deity of the mountains, and later the god of the trees, and a goddess to whom was entrusted the care of tender plants and herbs. Then Izanagi and Izanami said, "We have created the mighty kingdom of the 8 islands with mountains and rivers and trees, yet another divinity there must be, for who shall guard and rule this fair world?" As they spoke, a daughter was born to them. Her beauty was dazzling, and her regal bearing betokened that her throne should be set high above the clouds. She was none other than Amatsuru, the heaven-illuminating spirit. Izanagi and Izanami rejoiced greatly when they beheld her face, and exclaimed, "Our daughter shall dwell in the blue plain of high heaven, and from there she shall direct the universe." So they led her to the summit of the mountain, and over the wondrous bridge. The heaven spirits were joyful when they saw Amatsuru, and they said, "You shall mount into the soft blue of the sky. Your brilliancy shall illuminate, and your sweet smile shall gladden the eternal land, and all the world. Fleecy clouds shall be your handmaidens, and sparkling dewdrops your messengers of peace." The next child of Izanagi and Izanami was a son, and as he also was beautiful, with the dreamlike beauty of the evening, they placed him in the heavens, as co-ruler with his sister Amatsuru. His name was Tsukuyomi, the moon god. The god Susanoo is another son of the two deities who wooed and wed around the base of the pillar of earth. Another one of the two deities who wooed and wed around the base of the pillar of the earth. But unlike his brother and sister, he was fond of shadow and gloom. When he wept, the grass on the mountainside withered, the flowers were blighted, and men died. Izanagi had little joy in this son, but nonetheless he made him ruler of the ocean. Now that the world was created, the happy life of the god of the air and the goddess of the clouds was over. The consumer, the god of fire, was born, and as a result, Izanami died. She vanished into the deep solitudes of the kingdom of the trees, in the country of Ki, and disappeared thence into the lower regions. Izanagi was sorely troubled because Izanami had been taken from him, and he descended in pursuit of her to the portals of the shadowy kingdom, where sunshine is unknown. Izanami would fain have left that place to rejoin Izanagi on the beautiful earth. Her spirit came to meet him, and in urgent and tender words besought him not to seek her in these cavernous regions. But the bold god would not be warned. He pressed forward, and by the light struck from his comb, he sought out his loved one long and earnestly. Grim forms rose to confront him, but he passed them by with kingly disdain. Sounds as the wailing of lost souls struck his ear, but still he persisted. After endless search, he found his Izanami, lying in the attitude of untold despair, but so changed was he, that he gazed intently into her eyes, and he could not recognize her. She had become withered, rotted as a corpse. Izanami was furious that Izanagi had not listened to her commands, for she knew how fruitless would be his efforts. Without the sanction of the ruler of the underworld, she could not return to earth, and this consent she had already tried in vain to obtain. Izanagi was hard pressed by the 8 monsters who guarded the land of gloom, and had to flee for his life. He defended himself with his sword, and he threw down his headdress, and it was transformed into bunches of purple grapes. He also cast behind him the comb, by means of which he had obtained light, and from it sprang tender shoots of bamboo. While the monsters eagerly devoured the luscious grapes and tender shoots, Izanagi gained the broad flight of steps which led back to the earth. At the top, he paused and cried to Izanami, who had followed him up until the mouth but could not cross the threshold. "All hope of our reunion is now at an end. Our separation must be eternal." When to this proposal, his wife replied, "My dear and lord husband, if you say it is so, I will strangle to death 1,000 people in one day." This plaintive and threatening speech in no way influenced Izanagi, who replied sadly that, if she were to do so, he would cause 1,500 people to be born a day for every 1,000 that his dear wife slew. And so the loving pair were separated, finally. And stretching far beyond Izanagi lay the ocean, and on its surface was reflected the face of his well-beloved daughter, Amatsuru. She seemed to speak and beseech him to purify himself in the great waters of the sea. As he bathed, his wounds were healed, and a sense of infinite peace stole over him, despite the sorrow that still lingered in his heart. The life work of the earth-makers were done. Izanagi bestowed the world upon his children, and afterwards crossed for the last time the many-colored bridge of heaven. The god of the air now spends his days with the heaven-illuminating spirit in her sun-glorious palace, while the goddess of the clouds lingers in the world of death below. That is the end of our first story, but we are not quite done yet. Let us offset this sad story with another interesting tale. A fairy tale very popular among children. Most specifically, I am going to tell you the story of Urashima Taro, the fisher lad. Long, long ago, in the province of Tongo, there lived on the shore of Japan, in the little fishing village of Mitsuno-yi, a young fisherman named Urashima Taro. His father had been a fisherman before him, and his skill had more than doubly descended to his son, for Urashima was the most skilled fisher in all that countryside, and he could catch more fish in a day than his companions could in a week. But in the little fishing village, more than for being a clever fisher of the sea, was he known for his kind heart. In his whole life he had never hurt a thing, either great or small, and as a boy his companions had always laughed at him, for he would never join with them in teasing animals, but always tried to keep them from this cruel sport. One soft summer twilight he was going home at the end of a day's fishing, when he came upon a group of children. They were all screaming and talking at the top of their voices, and seemed to be in a state of great excitement about something, and on going up to them to see what was the matter, he saw that they were tormenting a tortoise. First, one boy pulled it this way, then another boy pulled it that way, while a third child beat it with a stick, and the fourth child hammered its shell with a stone. Now Urashima felt very sorry for the poor tortoise, and made up his mind to rescue it. He spoke to the boys. "Look here, boys, you are treating that poor tortoise so badly that it will soon die." The boys, who were all of an age where children seemed to delight in being cruel to animals, took no notice of Urashima's gentle reproof, but went on teasing it as before. One of the older boys answered, "Who cares whether it lives or dies? We do not. Here, boys, go on, go on." And then they began to treat the poor tortoise more cruelly than ever. Urashima waited a moment before turning it over in his head what would be the best way to deal with the boys. He would try to persuade them then to give up the tortoise to him, so he smiled at them and said, "I am sure that you are all good, kind boys. Now won't you give me the tortoise? I should like to have it so much." "No, we won't give you the tortoise," said one of the boys. "Why should we? We caught it ourselves." "What you say is true," said Urashima, "but I do not ask you to give it to me for nothing. I will give you some money for it. Won't you do that for me, my boys?" He held up the money to them, strung up on a piece of string through a hole in the center of each coin. "Look, boys, you can buy anything you like with this money. You can do much more with this money than you could with that poor tortoise. See what good boys you are to listen to me." The boys were not bad boys at all. They were only mischievous, and as Urashima spoke they were won by his kind smile and gentle words, and began to see things his way. Gradually they all came up to him, and the ringleader of the little band held out the tortoise to him. "Very well, we will give you the tortoise if you will give us the money." And Urashima took the tortoise and gave the money to the boys, who, calling to each other, scampered away and were soon out of sight. Urashima stroked the tortoise's back, saying as he did so, "Oh, you poor thing, poor thing! There, there! You are safe now. They say that the stork lives for 1,000 years, but the tortoise for 10,000 years. You have the longest life of any creature in the world, and you were in great danger of having that precious life cut by those cruel boys. Luckily I was passing by and saved you, and so life is still yours. Now I am going to take you back to your home, the sea, at once. Do not let yourself be caught next time, for there might be no one to save you next time." All the time that the kind fisherman was speaking, he was walking quickly to the shore and out upon the rocks. Then, putting the tortoise into the water, he watched the animal disappear and turned homewards himself, for he was tired and the sun had set. The next morning Urashima went out as usual to his boat. The weather was fine, and the sea and sky were both blue and soft in the tender haze of the summer morning. Urashima got into his boat and dreamily pushed out to sea, throwing his line as he did so. He soon passed the other fishing boats and left them behind till they were lost in the distance, and his boat drifted further and further out upon the blue waters. Somehow he did not know why, but he felt unusually happy that morning, and he could not help wishing that, like the tortoise he set free the day before, he had thousands of years to live instead of his own short span of human life. He was suddenly startled from his reverie by hearing his own name called. "Urashima! Urashima!" clear as a bell and soft as the summer wind, the name floated over the sea. He stood up and looked in every direction, thinking that one of the other boats had overtaken him. But gaze as he might over the wide expanse of water, near or far there was no sign of a boat, so the voice could not have come from any human being. Startled and wondering who or what it was that had called to him so clearly, he looked in all directions around him, and he saw that, without his knowing, a tortoise had come to the side of the boat. Urashima saw with surprise that it was the very tortoise he had rescued the day before. "Well, Mr. Tortoise," said Urashima, "was it you who called my name just now?" The tortoise nodded its head several times and said, "Yes, it was I. Yesterday, in your honorable shadow, my life was saved, and I have come to offer you my thanks and to tell you how grateful I am for your kindness to me." "Indeed," said Urashima, "that is very polite of you. Come up into the boat. I would offer you a pipe, but as you are a tortoise, doubtless you do not smoke." And the fisherman laughed at the joke. Laughed the tortoise. "Sake is my favorite refreshment, but I do not care for tobacco." "Indeed," said Urashima, "I regret very much that I have no sake in my boat to offer you. But come up and dry your back in the sun. Tortoises always love to do that." So the tortoise climbed into the boat, and the fisherman helping him, and after an exchange of complimentary speeches, the tortoise said, Have you ever seen Rinjin, the palace of the Dragon King of the Sea, Urashima?" The fisherman shook his head and replied, "No, year after year the sea has been my home, but though I have often heard of the Dragon King's realm under the sea, I have never yet seen eyes upon that wonderful place. It must be very far away if it exists at all." "Is that really so? You have never seen the Sea King's palace? Then you have missed seeing one of the most wonderful sights in the whole universe. It is far away at the bottom of the sea, but if I take you there we shall soon reach the place. If you would like to see the Sea King's land, then I will be your guide." "I should like to go there, certainly, and you are very kind to think of taking me. But you must remember that I am only a poor mortal, and have not the power of swimming like a sea creature such as you are." Before the fisherman could say more, the tortoise stopped him, saying, "What? You do not need to swim yourself. You will ride on my back. I will take you without any trouble on your part." "But how is it possible for me to ride on your small back?" "It may seem absurd to you, but I assure you that you can do so. Try it once. Just come up and get on my back, and see if it is as impossible as you think." As the tortoise finished speaking, Urashima looked at its shell, and strange to say that he saw that the creature had suddenly grown so big that a man could easily sit on its back. "This is strange indeed," said Urashima. "Well then, Mr. Tortoise, with your kind permission, I will get on your back." "Let us be off," he exclaimed as he jumped on. The tortoise, with an unmoved face, as if this strange perceiving was quite an ordinary event, said, "Now we will set out at our leisure," and with these words he leapt into the sea with Urashima on his back. Down through the water the tortoise dived. For a long time these two strange companions rowed through the sea. Urashima never grew tired, nor his clothes moist with water. At last, far in the distance, a magnificent gate appeared. Behind the gate, the long sloping roofs of a palace on the horizon. Urashima exclaimed, "That looks like the gate of some large palace just appearing. Mr. Tortoise, can you tell what that place is we can now see?" "That is the great gate of the Rinjin Palace. The large roof that you see behind the gate is the Sea King's palace itself." "Then we have at last come to the realm of the Sea King and to his palace," said Urashima. "Yes, indeed," answered the tortoise. "And don't you think we have come very quickly?" And while he was speaking, the tortoise reached the side of the gate. "And here we are, and you must please walk from here." The tortoise went in front of him, and speaking to the gatekeeper said, "This is Urashima Taro from the country of Japan. I have had the honor of bringing him as a visitor to this kingdom. Please show him the way." The gatekeeper, who was then a fish, at once led the way through the gates behind them. The red bream, the flounder, the sole, the cuttlefish, and all the chief vassals of the Dragon King of the Sea now came with courtly bows to welcome the stranger. "Urashima! Urashima! Welcome to the Sea Palace, the home of the Dragon King of the Sea. Thrice welcome are you, having come from such a distant country. And you, Mr. Tortoise, we are greatly indebted to you for all your trouble in bringing Urashima here." Then, turning again to Urashima, they said, "Please follow this way," and from here on the whole band of fishes became his guides. Urashima, being only a poor fishing lad, did not yet know how to behave in a palace. But, strange as though it was to him, he did not feel ashamed or embarrassed, but followed his kind guides quite calmly where they led to the inner palace. When he reached the portals, a beautiful princess with her attendant maidens came out to welcome him. She was more beautiful than any human being, and was robed in flowing garments of red and soft green like the underside of a wave, and golden threads glimmering through the folds of her gown. Her lovely black hair streamed over her shoulders in the fashion of a king's daughter many hundreds of years ago, and when she spoke her voice sounded like music over the water. Urashima was lost in wonder when he looked upon her, and he could not speak. Then he remembered that he ought to bow, but before he could make such a gesture, the princess took him by the hand and led him to a beautiful hall and to the seat of honor at the upper end, and bade he be seated. "Urashima Taro, it gives me the highest pleasure to welcome you to my father's kingdom," said the princess. "Yesterday you set free a tortoise, and I have sent for you to thank you for saving my life, for I was that tortoise. Now if you like, you shall live here forever in the land of eternal youth, where summer never dies, and where sorrow never comes, and I will be your bride, if you will, and we will live together happily forever afterwards." And as Urashima listened to her sweet words and gazed upon her lovely face, his heart was filled with a great wonder and joy, and he answered her, wondering if it was not all a dream. "Thank you 1,000 times for your kind speech. There is nothing I could wish for more than to be permitted to stay here with you in this beautiful land of which I have heard, but have never seen to this day. Beyond all words, this is the most wonderful place I have ever seen." While he was speaking, a train of fish appeared, all dressed in ceremonial trailing garments. One by one, silently and with stately steps, they entered the hall, bearing on coral trays delicacies of fish and seaweed, such as no one can dream of, and this wondrous fish was set before the bride and the bridegroom. The bridal was celebrated with dazzling splendor, and in the Sea King's realm there was great rejoicing. As soon as the young pair had pledged themselves in the wedding cup of wine, 3 times 3, music was played, and songs were sung, and fishes with silver scales and golden tails stepped in from the waves and danced. Urashima enjoyed himself with all his heart. Never in his whole life had he sat down to such a marvelous feast. When the feast was over, the princess asked the bridegroom if he would like to walk through the palace and see all that there was to be seen. Then the happy fisherman, following his bride, the Sea King's daughter, was shown all the wonders of that enchanted land, where youth and joy go hand in hand, and neither time nor age can touch them. The palace was built of coral and adorned with pearls, and the beauties and wonders of the place were so great that the tongue fails to describe them. But to Urashima, more wonderful than the palace was the garden that surrounded it. Here was to be seen at one time the scenery of the 4 different seasons. The beauties of summer and winter, spring and autumn were displayed to the wondering visitor at once. First, when he looked to the east, the plum and cherry trees were seen in full bloom, the nightingales sang in the pink avenues, and butterflies flitted from flower to flower. Looking to the south, all the trees were green in the fullness of summer, and the day cicada and the night cricket chirped loudly. Looking to the west, the autumn maples were ablaze like a sunset sky, and the chrysanthemums were in perfection. And looking to the north, the change made Urashima start, for the ground was silver white with snow, and trees and bamboos were also covered with snow, and the pond was thick with ice. And each day there were new joys and new wonders for Urashima, and was so great his happiness that he forgot everything, even the home he had left behind, and his parents, and his own country, and 3 days had passed without his even thinking of all that he had left behind. Then his mind came back to him, and he remembered who he was, and that he did not belong to this wonderful land, or the Sea King's palace, and he said to himself, "Oh dear, I must not stay on here, for I have an old father and mother at home. What can have happened to them all this time? How anxious they must have been these days, when I did not return as usual. I must go back at once, without letting one more day pass." And he began to prepare for the journey in great haste. Then he went to his beautiful wife, the princess, and bowing low before her, he said, "Indeed, I have been very happy with you for a long time, Otohime," for that was her name, "and you have been kinder to me than any words can tell. But now I must say goodbye. I must go back to my old parents." Otohime began to weep and said softly and sadly, "Is it not well with you here, Urashima, that you wish to leave me so soon? Where is the haste? Stay with me yet another day only." But Urashima had remembered his old parents, and in Japan the duty to parents is stronger than everything else, stronger even than pleasure or love, and he would not be persuaded, but answered, "Indeed, I must go. Do not think that I wish to leave you. It is not that. I must go and see my old parents. Let me go for one day, and I will come back to you." "Then," said the princess sorrowfully, "there is nothing to be done. I will send you back today to your father and mother, and instead of trying to keep you with me for one more day, I shall give you this as a token of our love. Please take it back with you." And she brought him a beautiful lacquer box tied about with a silken cord and tassels of red silk. Urashima had received so much from the princess already that he felt some compunction in taking the gift, and he said, "It does not seem right for me to take yet another gift from you after all the many favors I have received at your hands, but because it is your wish I will do so." And then he added, "Tell me, what is this box?" "That," answered the princess, "is the tamate bako, box of the jeweled hand, and it contains something very precious. You must not open this box, whatever happens. If you open it, something dreadful will happen to you. Now promise me that you will never open this box." And Urashima promised that he would never ever open the box, whatever happened. Then, bidding goodbye to Otohime, he went down to the seashore, the princess and her attendants following him, and there he found a large tortoise waiting for him. He quickly mounted the creature's back and was carried away over the shining sea into the east. He looked back to wave his hand to Otohime till at last he could see her no more, and the land of the Sea King and the roofs of the wonderful palace were lost in the far, far distance. Then, with his face turned eagerly towards his own land, he looked for the rising of the blue hills on the horizon before him. At last the tortoise carried him into the bay he knew so well, and to the shore from whence he had set out. He stepped onto the shore and looked about him while the tortoise rowed away back to the Sea King's realm. But this strange fear seemed to seize Urashima as he stood and looked about him. Why was he gazing so fixedly at the people that passed him by, and why did they in turn stand and look at him? The shore was the same and the hills were the same, but the people that he saw walking past him had very different faces to those he had known so well before. Wondering what it could mean, he walked quickly towards his old home. Even that looked different, but a house standed on the spot, and he called out, "Father, I have just returned," and he was about to enter when he saw a strange man coming out. "Perhaps my parents have moved while I was away, and now have gone somewhere else," was the fisherman's thought. Somehow he began to feel anxious, and he could not tell why. "Excuse me," he said to the man who was staring at him, "but till within the last few days I have lived in this house. My name is Urashima Taro. Where have my parents gone whom I left here?" A very bewildered expression came over the face of the man, and still gazing intently on Urashima's face, he said, "What? Are you Urashima Taro?" "Yes," said the fisherman, "I am Urashima Taro." "Ha ha!" laughed the man. "You must not make such jokes. It is true that once upon a time a man called Urashima Taro did live in this village, but that is a story 300 years old. He could not possibly be alive now." When Urashima heard these strange words, he was frightened and said, "Please, please, you must not joke with me. I am greatly perplexed. I really am Urashima Taro, and I have certainly not lived 300 years. Till 4 or 5 days ago I lived on this spot. Tell me what I want to know without any more joking, please." But the man's face grew more and more grave, and he answered, "You may or may not be Urashima Taro. I don't know. But the Urashima Taro of whom I have heard is a man who lived 300 years ago. Perhaps you are his spirit come to revisit your old home." "Why do you mock me?" said Urashima. "I am no spirit. I am a living man. Do you not see my feet?" And he stomped on the ground, first with one foot and then the other, to show the man, for Japanese ghosts have no feet. "But Urashima Taro lived 300 years ago. That is all I know. It is written in the village chronicles." "It is written in the village chronicles," persisted the man, who could not believe what the fisherman said. Urashima was lost in bewilderment and trouble. He stood looking all around him, terribly puzzled, and indeed something in the appearance of everything was different to what he remembered before he went away, and the awful feeling came over him that what the man was saying was perhaps true. He seemed to be in a strange dream. The few days he had spent in the Sea King's palace beyond the sea had not been days at all. They had been hundreds of years, and in that time his parents had died and all the people he had ever known, and the village had written down his story. There was no use in staying here any longer. He must get back to his beautiful wife beyond the sea. He made his way back to the beach, carrying in his hand the box which the princess had given him. But which was the way? He could not find it alone. Suddenly he remembered the box, the tamate bako. The princess told me when she gave me the box never to open it, that it contained a very precious thing. But now that I have no home, now that I have lost everything that was dear to me here, and my heart grows thin with sadness at such a time, if I open the box, surely I shall find something that will help me, something that will show me the way back to my beautiful princess over the sea. There is nothing else for me to do now. Yes, I will open the box and look in." And so his heart consented to this act of disobedience, and he tried to persuade himself that he was doing the right thing in breaking his promise. Slowly, very slowly, he untied the red silk cord. Slowly and wonderingly he lifted the lid of the precious box. And what did he find? Strange to say, only a beautiful little purple cloud rose out of the box in 3 soft wisps. For an instant it covered his face and wavered over him as if loath to let go, and then it floated away like the vapor over the sea. Urashima, who had been till that moment a strong and handsome youth of 24, suddenly became very, very old. His back doubled up with age, his hair turned snowy white, his face wrinkled, and he fell down dead upon the beach. Poor Urashima! Because of his disobedience he could never return to the Sea King's realm, or the lovely princess beyond the sea. Remember, children, never be disobedient to those who are wiser than you, for disobedience was the beginning of all the miseries and sorrows of life. And that is the second story that I have told for you today. Again, a sad one indeed, but I will end on a happy note, I promise. In the meantime, however, it's time for me to give you your keyword for the day. Remember, enter this into your summer reading account and you just might win a fabulous prize. The word of the day today is tamatabako, the jeweled box that Urashima had. You spell it Tamatebako, tamatabako. Enter that in, and good luck to you. Finally, we will end with one more story, returning to something similar to our first tale of gods and goddesses. This time with the children, a telling of the children of Izanagi and Izanami. Specifically, the story of Amatsuru and Susanoo. Amatsuru, the sun goddess, was seated in the blue plain of heaven. Her light came as a message of joy to the celestial deities. The orchid and the iris, the cherry and the plum blossom, the rice and the hemp fields answered to her smile. The inland sea was veiled in soft, rich color. Susanoo, the brother of Amatsuru, who had resigned his ocean scepter and now who had resigned his ocean scepter and now reigned as the moon god, was jealous of his sister's glory and worldwide sway. The heaven-illuminating spirit had but to whisper, and she was heard throughout her kingdom, even in the depths of the clear pool and in the heart of the crystal. Her rice fields, whether situated on hillside, in sheltered valley, or by running stream, yielded abundant harvests, and her groves were laden with fruit. But the voice of Susanoo was not so clear, his smile was not so radiant. The undulating fields which lay around his palace were now flooded, now parched, and his rice crops were often destroyed. The wrath and jealousy of the now moon god knew no bounds. Yet Amatsuru was infinitely patient and forgave him many times. Once, as was her wont, the sun goddess sat in the central court of her glorious home. She plied her shuttle. Celestial weaving maidens surrounded a fountain whose waters were fragrant with a heavenly lotus blossom. They sang softly of the clouds and the wind and the lift of the sky. Suddenly the body of a piebald horse fell through the vast dome at their feet. The beloved of the gods had been flayed with a backward flaying, and by the envious Susanoo. Amatsuru, trembling at this horrible sight, pricked her finger with the weaving shuttle, and profoundly indignant of the cruelty of her brother, withdrew into a cave and closed behind her the door of the heavenly rock dwelling. The universe was plunged into darkness. Joy and goodwill, serenity and peace, hope and love waned with the waning light. Evil spirits who heretofore had crouched in dim corners came forth and roamed abound. Their grim laughter and discordant tones struck terror into all hearts. Then it was that the gods, fearful for their safety and for the life of every beautiful thing, assembled in the bed of the tranquil river of heaven, whose waters had been dried up. One and all knew that Amatsuru alone could help them, but how to allure the heaven-illuminating spirit to set foot in this world of darkness and strife? Each god was eager to aid, and a plan was finally devised to entice her from her hiding place. Amanoko uprooted the holy sakaki trees, which grew on the mountain of heaven, and planted them around the entrance of the cave. High on the upper branches were hung up the precious string of curved jewels which Izanagi had bestowed upon the sun goddess. From the middle branches drooped a mirror wrought of the rare metals of the celestial mine. Its polished surface was as the dazzling brilliancy of the sun. Other gods wove from threads of hemp and paper mulberry an imperial robe of white and blue, which is placed as an offering for the goddess on the lower branches of the sakaki. A palace was also built, surrounded by a garden in which the blossom god called forth many delicate plants and flowers. Now all was ready, and Amanoko stepped forward and, in a loud voice, entreated Amatsuro to show herself. But his appeal was in vain. A great festival began. Uzumi, the goddess of mirth, led the dance and song. Leaves of the spindle tree crowned her head. Club moss from the heavenly Mount Kagu formed her sash. Her flowing sleeves were bound with the creeper vine, and in her hand she carried leaves of the wild bamboo and waved a wand of sungrass hung with tiny melodious bells. Uzumi blew on a bamboo flute, while the 800 myriad deities accompanied her on wooden clappers and instruments formed of bowstrings, across which were rapidly drawn stalks of reed and grass. Great fires were lighted round the cave, and as those were reflected in the face of the mirror, the long singing birds of eternal night began to crow as if the day had dawned. The merriment increased. The dance grew wilder and wilder. Uzumi's boldness grew, and the gods laughed until the heavens shook as if with thunder. Amatsuro, in her quiet retreat, unmoved the crowing of the Amatsuro, in her quiet retreat, heard, unmoved, the crowing of the cocks and the sounds of music and dancing. But when the heavens themselves shook with laughter of the gods, she peeped out from the cave and said, "What means this? I thought heaven and earth were dark, but now there is light." "Uzume dances and all the gods laughed." Uzume answered, "It is true that I dance and that the gods laughed, because in our midst is a goddess whose splendor equals your own. Behold!" Amatsuro gazed into the mirror and wondered greatly when she saw therein a goddess of exceeding beauty. She stepped from her cave, and forthwith a cord of rice straw was drawn upon the entrance. Darkness fled from the central land of reed plains, and there was light. Then the 800 myriad deities, including Uzume, who so loved Amatsuro, cried, "Oh, may the sun goddess never leave us again." And that is the end of my stories today, gentle listeners. Tune in next time for our next delve into a wonderful culture. I'll see you all very soon. Please be well, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.